Work occurs which seems little injurious to men, but cannot be endured by children. The hard labor, the irregularity of the hours, the frequent night work, and especially the great heat of the working place 100 to 130 Fahrenheit, engender in children general debility and disease, stunted growth, and especially affections of the eye, bowel complaint, and rheumatic and bronchial affections. Many of the children are pale, have red eyes, often blind for weeks at a time, suffer from violent nausea, vomiting, coughs, colds, and rheumatism. When the glass is withdrawn from the fire, the children must often go into such heat that the boards on which they stand catch fire under their feet. The glass blowers usually die young of debility and chest affections 208. As a whole, this report testifies to the gradual but sure introduction of the factory system into all branches of industry, recognizable especially by the employment of women and children. I have not thought it necessary to trace in every case the progress of machinery and the superseding of men as workers. Everyone who is in any degree acquainted with the nature of manufacture can fill this out for himself, while space fails me to describe in detail an aspect of our present system of production, the result of which I have already sketched, in dealing with the factory system. In all directions machinery is being introduced, and the last trace of the working man's independence thus destroyed. In all directions the family is being dissolved by the labor of wife and children, or inverted by the husband's being thrown out of employment, and made dependent upon them for bread. Everywhere the inevitable machinery bestows upon the great capitalist command of trade, and of the workers with it. The centralization of capital strides forward without interruption, the division of society into great capitalists and non-possessing workers is sharper every day, the industrial development of the nation advances with giant strides towards the inevitable crisis. I have already stated that in the handicrafts the power of capital, and in some cases the division of labor too, has produced the same results, crushed the small tradesmen, and put great capitalists and non-possessing workers in their place. As to these handicraftsmen there is little to be said, since all that relates to them has already found its place where the proletariat in general was under discussion. There has been but little change here in the nature of the work and its influence upon health, since the beginning of the industrial movement. But the constant contact with the factory operatives, the pressure of the great capitalists, which is much more felt than that of the small employer to whom the apprentice still stood in a more or less personal relation, the influences of life in towns, and the fall of wages, have made nearly all the handicraftsmen active participators in labor movements. We shall soon have more to say on this point, and turn meanwhile to one section of workers in London, who deserve our attention by reason of the extraordinary barbarity with which they are exploited by the money greed of the bourgeoisie. I mean the dressmakers and sewing women. It is a curious fact, that the production of precisely those articles which serve the personal adornment of the ladies of the bourgeoisie involves the saddest consequences for the health of the workers. We have already seen this in the case of the lace-makers, and come now to the dressmaking establishments of London for further proof. They employ mass of young girls, there are said to be 15,000 of them in all, who sleep, and eat on the premises, come usually from the country, and are therefore absolutely the slaves of their employers. During the fashionable season, which lasts some 4 months, working hours, even in the best establishments, are 15, and, in very pressing cases, 18 a day, but in most shops work goes on at these times without any set regulation, so that the girls never have more than 6, often not more than 3 or 4, sometimes, indeed, not more than 2 hours in the 24, for rest and sleep. Working 19 to 20 hours, if not the whole night through, as frequently happens. The only limit set to their work is the absolute physical inability to hold the needle another minute. Cases have occurred in which these helpless creatures did not undress during 9 consecutive days and nights, and could only rest a moment or two here and there upon a mattress, where food was served them ready cut up, in order to require the least possible time for swallowing. In short, these unfortunate girls are kept by means of the moral whip of the modern slave driver, the threat of discharge, to such long and unbroken toil as no strong man, much less a delicate girl of 14 to 20 years, can endure. In addition to this, the foul air of the workroom and sleeping places, the bent posture, the often bad and indigestible food, all these causes, combined with almost total exclusion from fresh air, entail the saddest consequences for the health of the girls. enervation, exhaustion, debility, loss of appetite, pains in the shoulders, back, and hips, but especially headache, begin very soon, then follow curvatures of the spine, high, deformed shoulders, leanness, swelled, weeping, and smarting eyes, which soon become short-sighted, coughs, narrow chests, and shortness of breath, and all manner of disorders in the development of the female organism. In many cases the eyes suffer, so severely that incurable blindness follows, but if the sight remains strong enough to make continued work possible, consumption usually soon ends the sad life of these milliners and dressmakers. Even those who leave this work at an early age, retain permanently injured health, a broken constitution, and, when married, bring feeble and sickly children into the world. All the medical men interrogated by the commissioner agreed that no method of life could be invented better calculated to destroy health and induce early death. With the same cruelty, though somewhat more indirectly, the rest of the needlewomen of London are exploited. The girls employed in staymaking have a hard, wearing occupation, trying to the eyes. And what wages do they get? I do not know, but this I know, that the middleman who has to give security for the material delivered, and who distributes the work among the needlewomen, receives 1.5d per piece. From this he deducts his own pay, at least 0.5d, so that 1d at most reaches the pocket of the girl. The girls who sew neckties must bind themselves to work 16 hours a day, and receive 4.5s a week 210, but the shirtmaker's lot is the worst. They receive for an ordinary shirt 1.5d, formerly second-third, but since the workhouse of St. Pancras, which is administered by a radical board of guardians, began to undertake work at 1.5d, the poor women outside have been compelled to do the same. For fine fancy shirts, which can be made in 1 day of 18 hours, 6d is paid. The weekly wage of these sewing women according to this, and according to testimony from many sides, including both needlewomen and employers, is 2.6d to 3s for most strained work continued far into the night. And what crowns this shameful barbarism is the fact that the women must give a money deposit for a part of the materials entrusted to them, which they naturally cannot do, unless they pawn a part of them as the employers very well know, redeeming them at a loss, or if they cannot redeem the materials, they must appear before a justice of the peace, as happened to a sewing woman in November, 1843. A poor girl who got into this strait, and did not know what to do next, drowned herself in a canal in 1844. These women usually live in little garret rooms in the utmost distress, where as many crowd together as the space can possibly admit, and where, in winter, the animal warmth of the workers is the only heat obtainable. Here they sit bent over their work, sewing from 4 or 5 in the morning until midnight, destroying their health in a year or two, and ending in an early grave, without being able to obtain the poorest necessities of life. Meanwhile 211, and below them roll the brilliant equipages of the upper bourgeoisie, and perhaps 10 steps away some pitiable dandy loses more money in one evening at faro than they can earn in a year. Such is the condition of the English manufacturing proletariat. In all directions, whithersoever we may turn, we find want, and disease permanent or temporary, and demoralization arising from the condition of the workers, in all directions slow but sure undermining, and final destruction of the human being physically as well as mentally. Is this a state of things which can last? It cannot and will not last. The workers, the great majority of the nation, will not endure it. Let us see what they say of it. Labor movements. It must be admitted, even if I had not proved it so often in detail, that the English workers cannot feel happy in this condition, that this is not a state in which a man or a whole class of men can think, feel, and live as human beings. The workers must therefore strive to escape from this brutalizing condition, to secure for themselves a better, more human position, and this they cannot do without attacking the interest of the bourgeoisie which consists in exploiting them. But the bourgeoisie defends its interests with all the power placed at its disposal by wealth and the might of the state. In proportion as the working man determines to alter the present state of things, the bourgeois becomes his avowed enemy. Moreover, the working man is made to feel at every moment that the bourgeoisie treats him as a chattel, as its property, and for this reason, if for no other, he must come forward as its enemy. I have shown in 100 ways in the foregoing pages, and could have shown in 100 others, that, in our present society, he can save his manhood only in hatred and rebellion against the bourgeoisie. and he can protest with most violent passion against the tyranny of the propertied class, thanks to his education, or rather want of education, and to the abundance of hot Irish blood that flows in the veins of the English working class. The English working man is no Englishman nowadays, no calculating money grabber